Now let's start with today's story. Growing up, I believe my family was just like any other. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable. My dad worked as a technician for a local company, while my mom stayed home to take care of me until I was about 10. From the outside, we appeared to be the perfect family, but looking back, I can see the cracks that were always there. My dad was a quiet, gentle man who always put others before himself. He wasn't flashy or outgoing, but he was reliable and kind. He worked long hours to ensure the bills were paid and that I never went without. No matter how busy he was, he would drop everything to help me with my homework or fix my bike when I needed it. I adored him. I remember one evening when I was struggling with my math homework, frustrated to the point of tears. Dad sat down beside me at the kitchen table, his brow furrowed in concentration as he looked at the problem. "All right, buddy, let's take it one step at a time," he said, his voice calm and patient. "If we break it down, it won't seem so bad." I sniffled and nodded, watching as he carefully explained each step. He never got frustrated, never made me feel stupid for not understanding. When I finally got the answer right, he smiled and ruffled my hair. "See, I knew you had it in you." My mom, on the other hand, was a force of nature, charismatic and charming. She had a way of walking into a room and instantly making friends. She was quick with a joke or a compliment, and people were naturally drawn to her, or at least, that's how it seemed to the outside world. At home, however, she was different. "Logan, how many times do I have to tell you not to leave your shoes by the door?" Her voice was sharp as she picked them up and dropped them by the staircase. "Sorry, Mom," I mumbled, hurrying to move them before she could say anything else. She sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "It's always something with you and your father. I swear, I'm the only one keeping this house from falling apart." I knew better than to argue. Instead, I just nodded and stayed out of her way. It was easier that way. If my dad forgot to pick something up from the store, if dinner didn't turn out exactly as she wanted, or if I did something wrong, she wouldn't yell, but her words could cut deep. "You know, Logan, if you actually listened the first time, maybe I wouldn't have to repeat myself so much," she'd say with a sigh, her eyes filled with disappointment. I hated that look. It made me feel small, like I was never quite good enough. But at the time, I didn't recognize it as toxic. I just thought she was particular. My dad bore the brunt of it. He never raised his voice or fought back when she criticized him. Instead, he would apologize, try to fix whatever had upset her, and move on. I think he believed that staying calm and keeping the peace was the best way to handle her. But it wasn't just criticism. It was as if she enjoyed having power over him. I remember one evening when she found a stain on the counter after dinner. It wasn't a big deal, just a small spot near the sink. My dad had been the last to use the kitchen, and she immediately zeroed in on him. "Honestly, do I have to do everything myself?" she muttered, wiping at the stain with unnecessary force. "You can't even clean up after yourself, James?" Dad set his newspaper down and got up without a word, taking the rag from her hands to clean it himself. I must have missed it. "Sorry, honey," he said gently. She crossed her arms and huffed. "You always miss things." He just nodded, gave her a small smile, and went back to his seat. I wanted to say something, but I knew better. Instead, I kept my head down, pretending to focus on my schoolwork. That was how things always went. She criticized, and he absorbed it. Things began to change when I turned 14. My mom got a job as a receptionist at a small law firm, and for the first time in years, she seemed genuinely happy. She started coming home with stories about her coworkers and the new projects she was working on. "You won't believe what happened today," she said one evening, setting her purse down on the kitchen counter. "One of the partners completely forgot about a client meeting, and I had to cover for him. He was so grateful, told me I saved his ass." Dad smiled as he set the table for dinner. "That's great, Linda. I'm proud of you." She beamed, clearly pleased with the praise. "It feels good to be doing something again, you know? Using my skills." At first, I was happy for her, and so was Dad. He was supportive, always asking about her day, telling her how proud he was that she was getting back into the workforce. But then the late night started. At first, it was just a few extra hours here and there, finishing up paperwork, attending a work event. "I'll be home late tonight," she said one morning, slipping on her heels as she grabbed her keys. "Some of us are going out after work to celebrate a big case win." Dad didn't question it. "That's fine. Have fun," he said, giving her a warm smile. But as the weeks passed, the late nights became more frequent. She started coming home after we had already eaten dinner, sometimes not arriving until well after midnight. I could see the toll it was taking on my dad. He never said anything to me directly, but I would catch him sitting at the kitchen table late at night, staring into his coffee cup with a distant look in his eyes. He started staying up later, waiting for her, but when she finally walked through the door, their conversations were brief and tense. One night, I woke up to the sound of muffled voices drifting from the kitchen. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. My parents rarely argued. Not loudly, anyway, but something about the hushed urgency in their voices made my stomach twist. I don't understand, Linda, my dad said, his voice low but tight. You're hardly ever home anymore. It's like you don't even want to be here. Oh, for God's sake. James, my mother snapped, the irritation clear in her voice. I work late because I have to, not because I'm trying to avoid you. There was a pause before my dad spoke again. That's not what I meant. He exhaled, and I could picture him rubbing the back of his neck, the way he always did when he was tired or upset. I just feel like something's changed. You've changed. A sharp scoff followed. So what? I get a job, and suddenly I'm the bad guy? Maybe you're just paranoid. It's not paranoia, he said quietly. It's concern. A chair scraped against the floor, and then, footsteps. My mother's voice was colder now. I don't have time for this, James. A moment later, I heard the bedroom door slam shut. The next morning, it was as if nothing had happened. My dad made me scrambled eggs, asking about my plans for the day like he always did. When my mom finally came downstairs, he even leaned over and kissed her on the cheek before heading to work. But I saw it, the sadness in his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged just a little more than usual. As the weeks passed, things only got worse. My mom started dressing differently. She bought new clothes, ones she never would have worn before, sleek skirts, form-fitting blouses, heels that clicked loudly against the floor. She started wearing makeup every day, getting her hair done more often. Wow, I said one morning, watching as she checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. You look different. She smiled, adjusting her earring. It's for work, she said. Gotta look professional. It didn't feel like just work. And then there was her phone. She got a new one, sleek, expensive, and always in her hand. She guarded it like it held the secrets of the universe, taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. At first, I ignored it. I was a teenager, and I didn't want to think too much about my parents' personal lives. But one evening, something happened that I couldn't ignore. My dad came home early from work, something he almost never did. He stepped through the front door, his face pale, his hands gripping a crumpled piece of paper. I was sitting on the couch, half watching TV, but when I looked up, I knew something was wrong. Dad, I asked, standing up. What's going on? He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the paper in his hands, his fingers tightening around it like he was trying to crush it. Then he let out a slow breath and shook his head. It's nothing, Logan, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Don't worry about it. I frowned. Are you sure? He gave me a small, tired smile, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. Yeah, bud. I just need to rest. And then he went into his bedroom and shut the door. I didn't know it then, but that piece of paper was the beginning of the end for our family. It was a receipt for a hotel stay, one my mom had never mentioned. He had found it while sorting through the bills, a single charge that didn't make sense. And that night, he confronted her. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but later, my dad told me everything. When I asked her about the hotel, he said, his voice hollow, she didn't even try to lie. She just admitted it. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, my hands clenched into fists. What did she say? She told me she was seeing someone else. He let out a short, bitter laugh, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stared at him. And then what? He looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping. She blamed me, Logan. Said I pushed her away. Said I wasn't ambitious enough. That I made her feel trapped. His voice wavered. Like everything I did for her, for this family, was never enough. My stomach twisted. That's bullshit. My dad sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Yeah, maybe, but it doesn't change anything. After that night, everything changed. It was as if my mom had stopped pretending to care about our family at all. One day, I came home from school and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped tightly around a plain white envelope. His expression was distant, like he wasn't really there. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, as if whatever was inside that envelope had sucked all the life out of him. Dad, I said hesitantly, dropping my backpack by the door. He startled, blinking rapidly before shoving the envelope to the side, as if he hadn't wanted me to see it. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Hey, kiddo, how was school? I ignored the question and sat across from him. What's wrong? For a long moment, he didn't say anything. His fingers drummed absently against the table, his gaze flickering toward the envelope and then away again. Finally, in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it, he said, I don't know how much more I can take. Something in the way he said it, so raw, so broken, sent a chill through me. I wanted to ask him what he meant, to press him for answers, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just sat there, watching as the man who had always been my rock slowly crumbled before my eyes. That sentence haunted me for weeks. It happened on an ordinary evening, The kind where the only thing on my mind was finishing my homework so I could escape into some mindless video game for a while. I was at the kitchen table, my textbook open in front of me, when my mom walked in, moving with an unsettling ease, like she didn't have a care in the world. She poured herself a glass of wine, leaned against the counter, and, without any warning, dropped a bomb. "I just wanted to let you know," she said casually, swirling the wine in her glass. "I'm seeing someone." I froze, my pen hovering over the page. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. I looked up, expecting her to say more, to at least have the decency to explain, but she didn't. No name, no details, nothing. Just a casual statement, like she was announcing she'd started a new diet or picked up yoga. My stomach churned. "What about Dad?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She exhaled through her nose, almost like she was annoyed I had even asked. "This has nothing to do with him." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Nothing to do with him? The man she had been married to for nearly 2 decades? The man who still loved her, who was breaking apart piece by piece while she stayed out all night and came home reeking of perfume that wasn't hers. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how disgusted I was, how selfish and cruel she had become. But I didn't. I just sat there, gripping my pen so tightly my knuckles turned white, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. She, on the other hand, took a long sip of her wine, set the glass down with a satisfied sigh, and walked out of the room as if we had just finished a perfectly normal conversation. After that, things spiraled fast. My mom didn't just cheat on my dad. She seemed determined to destroy him. It wasn't enough for her to leave. She needed to rewrite history, to make herself the victim. She started telling anyone who would listen that my dad had been controlling and emotionally abusive, that he had made her miserable, that he was the reason she had to seek happiness elsewhere. None of it was true, but she was so convincing that even some of our extended family began to believe her. The worst day of my life started like any other. I got home from school, tossing my backpack onto the couch, expecting to hear my dad in the kitchen or see him at the table with a stack of bills. Instead, the house was silent, eerily so. The front door was slightly ajar, swaying gently from the wind outside, and a cold dread crept up my spine. Something wasn't right. I stepped inside, calling out, "Dad?" No answer. The silence pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating. My pulse quickened as I moved through the house, checking every room. Empty. It wasn't until a neighbor knocked on the door that I got my first clue. "I saw the police here earlier," she said, shifting uneasily. "They took your dad." I blinked at her, trying to process what she had just said. "Took him?" She nodded. "In handcuffs." The words didn't make sense. My dad? Arrested? That was impossible. He wasn't a criminal. He barely even raised his voice, let alone did anything that would warrant being dragged away by the cops. But the look on my neighbor's face told me she wasn't lying. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing, my mind running through 1,000 terrifying possibilities. It wasn't until later that evening, when my mom finally came home, that I found out the truth. She was in the living room, phone pressed to her ear, laughing, actually laughing, like nothing had happened. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening. "Yeah," she said, amusement dripping from her voice. "I finally did it. I filed the report this morning. They picked him up this afternoon." A pause. Then, lower but still clear enough to make my stomach churn. "Of course, I told them he hit me." What else was I supposed to say? I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My breath came in short, sharp bursts as I forced myself to step into the room. "You lied," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned, not the least bit startled. Instead, she smiled, the kind of smile you give someone when they're being naive. "Logan, honey, you don't understand." "No," I cut her off, my hands shaking. "I understand perfectly. You lied. You sent Dad to jail." She sighed, shaking her head like I was too young to get it. "It's complicated. Complicated." That was the word she chose while my dad was sitting in a jail cell for something he didn't do. The next few weeks were a nightmare. My dad spent several nights behind bars before finally being released on bail, but by then, the damage was done. His arrest was all over the local news. His boss didn't even bother waiting for the trial. He was fired the same day he got out. Friends he had known for years stopped answering his calls, stopped looking him in the eye when they passed him on the street. The world had already made up its mind about him. And my mom? She played the role of the perfect victim, like she had been preparing for it her whole life. She arrived at every court hearing with tear-streaked cheeks, her voice trembling as she told lie after lie. My dad, meanwhile, looked like a hollowed-out version of the man he used to be. The legal system didn't care about the truth. It didn't care that my father was innocent or that my mother had lied through her teeth. All that mattered was her word against his, and with no solid evidence to clear his name, the judge ruled against him. Just like that, everything he had worked for was gone. His reputation was destroyed, His career was over, and what little savings he had left had been drained by legal fees. Not long after, he lost the house. I still remember the day we packed up what little he had left. He didn't say much, just moved like a man on autopilot, stuffing his life into boxes as if it wasn't even his anymore. He rented a tiny apartment on the other side of town, barely more than a single room. I wanted to go with him, but my mother was granted full custody, and I wasn't given a choice. Worst of all, they never let me tell the court the truth. No one wanted to hear that my mother was the real villain. Every time I tried to speak up, I was silenced, told that I was too young to understand, that I was just confused, that my mother was the one who needed protection. Living with her became unbearable. She didn't act like a mother anymore, more like some puppet master, pulling strings, twisting everything to suit her narrative. She treated me like an extension of herself, a piece of her story rather than a person. If I so much as mentioned my father's name, she would shut me down in an instant. "You don't understand what he put me through," she'd say, her voice sharp and final, as if that alone ended the conversation. I wanted to scream that she was the one who had done the damage, that she was the one who had torn everything apart, but I knew better than to fight her. Instead, I let my resentment fester, growing deeper and darker until it turned into something close to hatred. Meanwhile, my father was barely holding on. He texted me every few days, always trying to sound positive. "Hope you're doing okay, kiddo. Love you." But I could see through the words. He was slipping away, piece by piece. Every time I visited, he looked worse, tired, thinner, like the weight of everything was pressing down on him, slowly crushing him. His apartment reflected what was happening to him. It was almost empty, just a mattress on the floor, a couple of thrift store chairs, and a small table that wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. The fridge was practically bare, and his clothes hung limply in the tiny closet, as if they belonged to a ghost of the man he used to be. One evening, as I sat on the mattress beside him, I finally asked, "Are you okay, Dad?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, bud. Just trying to figure things out." "Are you sure?" My voice was quiet. "You don't have to pretend with me." He sighed, running a hand down his face. "I just don't know how to fix this, Logan." His voice cracked, and it scared me more than anything. I wanted to tell him that I'd fix it, that somehow, I'd make everything right again. But before I could, he patted my shoulder and forced another smile. "Don't worry about me, all right? Just focus on school." I nodded, but the pit in my stomach didn't go away. Then, one day, everything fell apart. I'll never forget the day I lost my father. Not just because of what happened, but because of how painfully normal that morning had seemed. It was a Saturday, the kind of lazy morning where I could sleep in a little longer before getting ready for the day. I had plans to spend the afternoon at a friend's house, and my mother, as usual, was too preoccupied with her phone to care. She barely looked up when I told her I was leaving. I hadn't spoken to my dad in a few days, not unusual by then. Our conversations had grown shorter, his texts less frequent. I figured he just needed space. He always told me not to worry about him, so I tried to believe that he was managing, that things would get better. When I got home that evening, the house was eerily quiet. No TV humming in the background, no clatter of dishes in the sink. Just silence. For a moment, I thought I might have the place to myself, and for once, I was relieved. But then my eyes landed on the kitchen counter. A small envelope sat there, my name scrawled across the front in my father's handwriting. My stomach twisted. I stepped closer, my hands trembling as I picked it up. The paper felt too thin, too fragile, like it could crumble in my fingers. I tore it open and unfolded the neatly written letter inside, my breath catching in my throat as I began to read. "Logan, I'm sorry. That was how it started. An apology, the last thing I ever wanted from him." My hands gripped the paper tighter as I kept reading. He told me how much he loved me, how proud he was of the person I was becoming. He said he wished things had been different, that he had been stronger, that he could have fought harder. But the weight of it all had finally become too much. He wrote about everything my mother had done to him, how she had systematically torn his life apart, piece by piece. She took everything from me, Logan. The accusations, the lies, she made sure there was nothing left. I could see his handwriting growing shakier in the last few lines. She drained our accounts while I was in jail. I came out with nothing. No job, no money, no home. She told everyone I was a monster, and they believed her. Even people I thought were my friends. My eyes burned as I kept reading. I tried to stay strong for you. I wanted to, more than anything. But she looked me in the eye, Logan. She looked at me and said I deserved everything that had happened to me. Yet despite it all, he didn't want me to hate her. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because he didn't want me to carry that kind of anger for the rest of my life. I stared at those words, my hands shaking so badly that the letter crinkled between my fingers. He was asking me to do something impossible. How could I not hate her? She had ruined him. She had taken everything from him. And now Now she had taken him from me too. By the time I finished reading, I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. My chest felt tight, my throat raw. I grabbed my phone and called my dad's number. It rang once before going straight to voicemail. No, 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 I whispered, my fingers fumbling to redial. I called again, and again, and again. Each time, it went straight to voicemail. Come on, Dad, I pleaded. Please pick up. Nothing. That's when the fear truly set in. Something was wrong. I didn't know where he was or what he had done, but I knew it was bad. An hour later, the confirmation came. A knock at the door made me jump, and I ran to answer it. A police officer stood on the other side, his expression carefully neutral, like he had done this too many times before. Is your mother home? He asked. She's in the living room, I said. The officer gave me a small nod before stepping inside. Ma'am, he called. My mother glanced up from her phone, frowning. What is this about? The officer hesitated. I'm very sorry to inform you, but your husband was found in his apartment earlier today. The words caught in his throat for just a second before he continued. He took his own life. My ears started ringing. The room suddenly felt too small. No, I choked out. No, he wouldn't. I felt myself swaying, my knees threatening to buckle. The officer stepped toward me like he was ready to catch me if I fell, but I barely noticed. My entire body was numb. My mother, to her credit, looked surprised, but it wasn't grief. It was more like she had just been informed of an inconvenient change to her schedule. She pressed her lips together, then let out a small sigh. I never thought he'd actually go through with it, she muttered before turning and walking away, already dialing a number on her phone. Something inside me snapped. I wanted to scream at her, to rip the phone from her hands and force her to acknowledge what she had done, to make her feel even an ounce of the devastation that was swallowing me whole. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked to my room, shutting the door behind me. I slid down onto the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. My dad's letter was still clutched in my hands, my fingers gripping it so tightly the edges curled. I held onto it like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. The funeral was small and quiet. The kind of quiet that felt suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. Most of the people who attended did so out of obligation rather than genuine care. My dad's name had been dragged through the mud so thoroughly that even his closest friends seemed hesitant to show up, as if mourning him was a risk to their own reputations. My mother played the grieving widow flawlessly, crying on cue, accepting condolences with a perfectly rehearsed sadness, as if she hadn't been the one who had pushed him to this point. I watched her with a hollow sort of detachment, noting the way she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue even though no real tears had fallen. I didn't cry at the funeral. I didn't feel anything at all. I just stood there, staring at the casket, wondering how it had come to this. How my father, who had once been so full of life, had been reduced to a box in the ground while the person responsible for his suffering continued to walk free. In the weeks that followed, my grief hardened into anger. My mother carried on as though nothing had happened, going to work, spending time with her affair partner, occasionally throwing out hollow platitudes about moving forward. We have to keep living, Logan, she said one evening as she set her purse down on the kitchen counter. Your father wouldn't have wanted you to dwell on this forever. I clenched my jaw. You don't get to say what my father would have wanted. She let out a sigh, shaking her head. I know you're hurting, but being angry won't change anything. It's time to move on. Move on. As if my father's life had just been some inconvenient chapter we needed to close. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her exactly what I thought of her, but instead, I did something else. I took my dad's letter, scanned it into my computer, and wrote a long email attaching it as proof. I poured out every ounce of truth I had been forced to keep inside. The lies, the manipulation, the way she had systematically destroyed him. Then, without hesitation, I sent it to everyone I could think of, family members, family friends, even a few of my mother's coworkers. I didn't care about the fallout. I just wanted the truth to be known. The responses started pouring in within hours. My mother's phone buzzed nonstop, and I could hear her raised voice in the next room as she scrambled to do damage control. No, that's not. You don't understand the full story, she snapped into the phone. He was unstable. No, I am not going to sit here and defend myself against. Her voice wavered. I smirked bitterly. For the first time, she had no control over the narrative. The letter was too damning, too detailed, too real to dismiss. Her family turned against her almost immediately. The same relatives who had once defended her, who had chosen to believe her lies, suddenly wanted nothing to do with her. Friends who had stood by her during the divorce stopped returning her calls. And then came the final blow. She lost her job. Someone at her workplace had forwarded the email to her boss, and they decided they didn't want someone with her kind of baggage representing their company. I watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. She had no idea I was the one who leaked the letter, and I had no intention of telling her. For months, she had painted herself as the victim while tearing my father apart, piece by piece. She had shown no remorse for what she had done, no grief for the man she had once claimed to love. And now, finally, she was paying the price. I kept my distance from her as much as possible, but living under the same roof made that difficult. I was still a minor, and after the divorce, the court had granted her full custody. It felt like a cruel joke, being forced to stay with the person who had caused so much pain. She, on the other hand, seemed to resent my very presence. She never said it outright, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. Every interaction was clipped and cold. If I forgot to do a chore or came home late from school, she would lash out with cutting remarks. "I have enough on my plate without you making things harder," she snapped one night when I left my backpack on the kitchen table. I glanced at her, unimpressed. "Then maybe you should focus on fixing your own mess instead of nitpicking mine." Her jaw tightened. "You think this is funny? Watching me struggle?" I shrugged. "I think it's overdue." Her face darkened, but she didn't say anything else. She just turned away, muttering under her breath as she grabbed a wine glass from the cabinet. I had gotten used to that. Her stress drinking, her bitterness. I learned to keep my head down and my mouth shut, counting down the days until I could finally leave. But that day would never come. By then, my mother had surrounded herself with the kind of men who made my skin crawl. They were the type who had dead eyes and cruel smiles, who reeked of booze and cheap cologne, who never looked me in the eye, but always seemed too aware of my presence. They did drugs, and they did other things I refused to speak of even now. Every time they came over, I either locked myself in my room or left the house entirely. It was one of those nights. She brought 2 men with her this time. I barely spared them a glance as I grabbed my hoodie and walked out the door. I wandered the streets for hours, aimless, numb, waiting for the moment I could return without having to see or hear what was happening inside. When I finally stepped back into the house, the smell hit me first: sweat, alcohol, something chemical and sharp. The living room was a disaster. There was white powder scattered across the coffee table, a rolled-up dollar bill resting beside it. An empty bottle of vodka lay on its side, its contents soaking into the carpet. And on the floor near the couch, a used rubber. I clenched my fists and forced myself to keep moving. None of this was new. None of it surprised me anymore. Then I saw her. My mother was face down on the floor, motionless. For a second, I thought she was just passed out like she had been so many times before. But as I stepped closer, I saw the vomit pooling beneath her cheek, the faint, ragged rise and fall of her chest. She had overdosed. A part of me reacted on instinct. I moved toward her, kneeling beside her and turning her over onto her back. Her face was pale, her lips slightly parted. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed, unfocused, but there was something there, fear. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a weak gurgle. She was choking on her own vomit. Her hand jerked toward the coffee table, toward her phone. She wanted me to call for help. I stood up, took 3 steps back, and just watched. She gasped for air, her fingers twitching as she weakly motioned again toward the phone. Her eyes locked onto mine, pleading. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let her look at me, let her see the choice I was making. For 3 minutes, she struggled. Her body convulsed, her mouth opening and closing as if trying to form one last desperate word. Then, finally, she went still. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 30. Then, and only then, did I pick up the phone and dial 911. When they arrived, they pronounced her dead. I don't want to talk about her funeral. There was nothing worth remembering about it. Nothing that mattered. I was nearly 18, and the court decided I could stay in the house. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, made sure there was food in the fridge, and, somehow, I didn't let my grades slip. I refused to let everything I had endured be for nothing. After graduation, I got a job as an accountant at a local used car dealership. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I knew numbers. They made sense to me. Unlike people, numbers were predictable. They didn't lie, didn't manipulate, didn't destroy lives for the sake of their own selfish desires. I've never dated. After everything I've seen, everything I've lived through, I'm not sure I ever will. The idea of letting someone in, of trusting them enough to share my life, feels impossible. I don't even know if I'm capable of love, not in the way most people seem to be. I've never talked about what happened with my mother. Not to a friend, not to a stranger, not to anyone. The memories still haunt me in the quiet hours of the night. There are moments, in the dead silence of my room, when I see her face again, her lips parted, her fingers twitching toward the phone. But the nightmares don't bring guilt. They don't bring regret. My heart rate never spikes. If anything, it stays as steady as ever. Sometimes, I think about going to her grave just to piss on it. to finally give her the respect she deserves. But just a few feet away, my father is sleeping, and he doesn't deserve to have her filth stain the earth around him. This is my life, and I prefer it alone. Dear listeners,